There are three dominant misconceptions about autism that feed the concept of high functioning. For starters, contrary to popular belief, there is no linear autism spectrum. It's more of a three-dimensional pyramid with multiple intersecting points. Good day, this is Shahid Naseem, and today we are going to talk about, in this live session, the levels of autism, myth or facts. So we're going to break down this to little pieces and try to understand what actually autism is and what is the spectrum all about, and how we can categorize into different levels, or either we should categorize it into different levels, or is it just a myth and there is no levels or a spectrum out there. So let's get into the details and try to figure out if is there any or really a single spectrum of autism. As I told you that there is no linear autism spectrum, and it's more of a three-dimensional or three-dimensional pyramid kind of a thing with multiple intersecting points. The psychiatrist and autism researcher Lorna Wing, really sorry about my English pronunciation, Lorna Wing, who coined the term and added it to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, never meant for it to be seen as linear progression from low to high function, but rather a triad of three different spectra, including social interaction, communication, and imagination. Another common misconception is that autism is obvious. In fact, a 2020 study noted that likely a quarter of children with the autism spectrum disorder are undiagnosed. And finally, the biggest and most widely held set of misconceptions is that autism is very rare, very severe, and only affects the young, the very young. At this point, only a small fraction of the autistic population can be described this way. According to the CDC, as of 2022, about 1 in 44 children in the United States has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. In later years, it was above 50. The study was a bit old, like in 2022. So in that study, it was shown that every one child in 44 children in the United States has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Now, what the spectrum gets wrong? Now, one of the biggest information hurdle is around the concept of the spectrum. One of the main reasons that the term high functioning autism is not used by health practitioners or therapists or researchers or autistic people themselves is because most people on the autism spectrum are often high functioning in one area of the triad and their lives, but need more support in another, as opposed to being high functioning or in need of more support across all three areas of the spectrum. And in addition, functionality often changes over the course of the lifespan of an autistic person. I just want you to remember here the Temple Grandin, who is widely considered one of the most accomplished and successful autistic people in recent history, and is known for her powerful public speeches and innovative contributions in her field of animal science. She researched on animal science and how animal behaves in different situations, and she was also a bestseller book writer. And she was considered very low functioning as a child, and she was non-verbal and could only scream. But once her autism was better understood, she was taught to speak with the proper support and accommodations. Another successful example is John Elder Robinson. If you knew him, if you don't even know him, you can search about him and you'll be surprised to know him. He designed the rock band Kiss's special effects guitar to do spectacular things such as shoot fires and rockets, and he was also underestimated as a child, but it was because they did not have the right supports or support system or adults around them who understood the way their brains worked, which they emphasize is why these labels are so offensive and meaningless. Okay, coming to the point of today's fact or fiction, and are there any different types of autism or not? The question is, are there different types of autism? If you have asked this question prior to 2013, the answer would have been yes. However, since the autistic disorders have been reclassified as autism spectrum disorder, and it was done in 2013, according to the level of severity of the associated symptomatic behaviors in autism, and individuals' ability to communicate with and relate with others is impacted as they grow up. The perception of world is also affected. Most people with severe autism cannot speak. They may communicate verbally, visually, or by using technology, People with autism may not like looking at you and prefer to stare at the fingers, the ground, or another spot when conversing. Others have difficulty making eye contact. The severity of autism symptoms varies from person to person. Despite the wide range of symptoms, strengths, and weaknesses, there are also many common factors among people with different types of autism. Now, autism diagnosis pre 2013, like when it was diagnosed before 2013. Prior to 2013, a wide variety of autism types were diagnosed based on specific sets of symptoms. People with autism with a higher level of functioning showed different symptoms than those with a lower level. Now, people with milder forms of autism were considered high functioning, while those with more severe forms were considered sorry those with more severe forms were considered low functioning. However, these separate diagnoses were found you can say they were found inadequate because they did not account for the wide variances from individual to individual occurring as on a spectrum. Therefore, in May 2013, the American Psychiatric Association released a new version of its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, which we call DSM-5. In this updated manual, different types of autism were combined into one diagnosis, which was called Autism Spectrum Disorder, now formally called as ASD. In general, a person with ASD has problems in three different areas, if we have to categorize it: developmentally appropriate and social communication skills, number one, this, and number two is restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interest or activities, and number three is unusually intense or sensitive behaviors. We have talked about this before, like if he's sensitive about loudness or different, maybe he or she is sensitive about touching something or touching someone, or loud noises or crowded places, that kind of a situation. Symptoms may be different for each person with ASD. They may range from mild to severe and can change over time. Some people will need a lot of help throughout their lives, while others need much less. Prior to 2013, the autistic disorder was a term that referred to an individual with marked challenges with social interaction and communication, repetitive behaviors, disrupted sleeping or eating disorder or eating behaviors, and a predisposition to tantrums or meltdowns. It was roughly correspondent with a more severe autism spectrum disorder diagnosis today. Childhood disintegrative disorder. Children who were diagnosed with childhood disintegrative disorder typically ranged in age from 2 to 12 years old, and this means that all areas of development, including language skills, social skills, physical skills, begin regressing around the age at which most children are gaining these skills. As children reach different developmental milestones, other skills such as cognitive thinking skills and reasoning skills also begin to decline. So these are some kind of things which we need to cater for, or which we should think about these kind of things. Symptoms or traits for an autistic person who has a low need for services and support as opposed to a high need, and this can often does change throughout the life of autistic person. Of all the symptoms in the DSM-5 listed under autism spectrum disorder can also be experienced as strengths or simply preferences and personality traits as opposed to disabilities. While autism can be and certainly is debilitating for a fraction of people, many who do not need a high level of support see themselves as a minority group with a shared set of traits and characteristics, as opposed to sufferers of a mental disorder. And more of the 5 million autistic people in the United States are challenging and questioning the DSM characterization. Autistic traits such as narrow interest, repetitive actions, heightened reactions to sensory stimuli, vivid imagination, and enjoyment of spending time alone can be beneficial in professional environments that require a high level of focus and specialization, or thinking outside of the box, such as coding or engineering kind of a thing. Similarly, many symptoms of autism, such as difficulty socializing or making eye contact, stop being symptoms of a disorder and just become personality traits when autistic people are not trying to interact with the unaccommodating neurotypical people and are permitted to engage with their interest alone or with one another. This often happens at conferences and meetups within the autistic community, or with friends and family who have learned how to interact with an autistic person without demanding that they have exactly as neurotypical people do in social settings. The implication for a diagnosis, this is an important part of this. Diagnosing a child with autism as high functioning is thought of as offensive within the autistic community, because of the implication that other people on the spectrum are low functioning, but it has also been proven time and again to not be useful diagnosis. So there is no biomarker of for different types of autism. In fact, there is no biomarker for autism at all. So a label of high or low functioning is not based on any test or scientific evidence. This is why doctors and therapists for most part do not use high functioning autism as a diagnosis. It's simply not accurate. But the thing which we are trying to make clear here, that all these levels of autism that we talk about, and we say that it's a spectrum and each person needs a different kind of support system, is because when you call it severe symptoms, or what you call it a high functioning, like we are talking about right now, the main thing is that the level of support one requires defines on what level he or she is. So if he requires extensive support and he cannot go about with his daily routine without support, or without extensive support or proper support, then it means that it is on the level 3 or end level of the autism, or on the above side of the spectrum. But if he needs minimal support to go on about his daily life routine, then obviously it's low on the spectrum. There was this term which we used for autism was called Asperger syndrome, which was used to be considered a type of high functioning autism, is also no longer a medical diagnosis. Instead, it is now included within the broader autism spectrum. Some Aspergians do continue to identify that way though, since it was their initial diagnosis. How interventions impact functioning, this is also very important about this. One, given the correct support and services such as a keyboard or some alternate means of communication, many ones so-called low functioning people on the autism spectrum become able to communicate quite effectively, even exceptionally. The abilities of so-called low functioning autistics have been underestimated for decades, while the challenges of high functioning autistics have also been underestimated and under support. Now you might be wondering that why are we talking about these kind of things. Back in the second section also we were talking about this in the previous section, in the previous live session, because we are receiving so many emails, so many messages about level of autism, and people tend to disagree with a lot of other people who agree with us. Somehow it becomes a group of people who agree with us, and there's some people who do not agree with us. So we wanted to clear these things out, that we are not on any side either. We are just giving you information. We are just discussing different concepts, different understandings, and different point of views, different opinions, different researches, and we are still in the process, in the journey of understanding these things better. And the whole purpose of these videos, these research, these live session is to try to understand these conditions better and try to improve that understanding also by every day and each day. So one point people believe, or people think that there are different levels of autism, and not just the level of autism but the severity of autism also changes, and they call high functioning autism and then low functioning autism, and then the other side call it the so-called high functioning autism or so-called low functioning autism, and they do not agree with that, and they say they believe that somehow if you call somebody a high functioning autism or autistic, then it somehow lessen the what you call the severity of the other people who you calling low functioning autism. So by calling somebody high functioning autism, you are demeaning all those people who are you referring to, or who are you're referring to as low functioning autism. So it makes their life a bit difficult. So that is why there is no stigma, and you cannot call anybody high functioning autistic or a low functioning autistic. An autistic person is an autistic person, and that's it. And although there are spectrums, it is a spectrum. By name, you know that autism spectrum disorder we call it. And the reason we call it a spectrum, because it's not a what you call a specific kind of a thing or a linear thing. It's a spectrum where one can need an extensive support, and the other person might not need that kind of a support throughout the day or throughout the month. But there could be a person who cannot speak properly, or who can communicate properly, who cannot make an eye contact, and who cannot go about his daily routine without proper support system. So treatment, being autistic and a part of a community or school system with the proper support and services, can be similar to being a person what you call who uses a wheelchair, who lives in a town with ramps and proper accessibility. This is why a diagnosis and support plan are so important. Okay, we got a comment here. Gorgeous Wales, I believe my child is severe autism, non-verbal. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thought with us. It's very important that you share your experiences and your thoughts with us. And Gorgeous Wales, we would really like to know a little bit more details about your journey and about how you're treating, how you are going out with this, and how you are coping with this with your child, and what strategies are you using to make better understanding of your child's situation or his condition, and how your child behaves. We really like to know what are your experiences and how you're dealing with this, what happens with in your daily life, and how everything goes. We would really like to know all these kind of things. Autism spectrum disorder is an umbrella term used to identify a variety of neurodevelopmental disorders, and these disorders are grouped together because they have similar effects on a person's ability to communicate, socialize, behave, develop, etc. And many autistic individuals have some difficulties with or delays in communication and speech. Some people may have minimal support needs, and while others may need significant support. Some autistic people may not speak at all. In fact, around 25 to 30% of children with ASD are minimally verbal, which means they speak fewer than 30 or so words, or don't speak at all, as somebody has commented on this video also, that the child is severe autistic and non-verbal. He's not communicating, he doesn't speak much. So that's one of the example. When an autistic person doesn't speak, it's known as non-speaking autism. You may also see it described as non-verbal autism. However, the term non-verbal isn't completely accurate since it means without words. Even if an autistic person is non-speaking, they may still use words in other ways, such as in writing. They may also understand the words that are spoken to them or that they overhear. You need to keep reading about these things. You need to keep researching about these things, and you need to keep try to understand your search and your struggle about these kind of things, so you can understand these better. My well wishes goes to Gorgeous Wales and to your child. I hope you can lead a very, very great life. You have a very great life ahead of you. We were talking about treatments. When adults who don't have high need or high support and were not diagnosed as children into treatment, it's usually not because autism is suspected. Instead, they might come in for anger management or anxiety and depression, or given GI issues or an eating disorder. There are high comorbidities within autism in all of these other therapeutic areas. One person that autism was so underdiagnosed in the past is because the initial diagnostic criteria did not allow for coexisting conditions such as epilepsy, developmental disorder, Down syndrome, or anxiety disorders and depression. Talking about the autism spectrum disorder, we talk about the previous Asperger's syndrome or the pre-2013 autism. Let's talk about today's autism spectrum disorder. I've already told you that it is generally grouped into 3 different levels based on their severity: high functioning, low functioning, and classic autism. Individuals with different kinds of ASD usually have specific issues. So, okay. Today's autism we are talking about. So, high functioning, low functioning, or classic autism. Individuals with different kinds of ASD usually have specific issues in at least some parts of language, like communication, social skills, etc., etc. High functioning autism, which is called level 1 autism. The first level is known as high functioning autism, and people who have high functioning autism typically cannot communicate well verbally and tend to be withdrawn from social interaction. People with the HFA, high functioning autism, might also avoid eye contact and interactions with other people. Whereas the level 2, the next level, is called the low functioning autism, and people with the low functioning autism typically have a very difficult time communicating verbally. And you can change the levels of the autism. You can call the high functioning level 3, or you can call, the classic autism level 1. That doesn't change the fact that these are categorized in a different way. So more focused on high functioning, low functioning, and classic autism, rather than the classification of number 1, 2, and 3. So number 2, the low functioning autism, a very difficult time communicating verbally and may have limited speech or even be unable to speak at all. They often have severe behavior problems, such as frequently running away from home or attacking other people or self-injury. They also may not respond to their names and often prefer being alone rather than interacting socially with others. The level 3 classic autism, which we call it, is called classic autism. People with this autism typically have severe communication problems, including very limited speech. They also tend to be very withdrawn socially and spend much more of their time alone doing repetitive things. Classic autism is different from most other forms of different types of autism in that it includes a narrow set of behaviors, such as severe problems communicating, severe problems interacting with others, and severe problems taking care of oneself. As a result, people with classic autism become increasingly disabled, and especially over time, unless they receive extensive support throughout their life. So these are the three we call levels, these three levels. And the reason it is designed, or it is categorized in 3 levels, is because the level of support it requires, not because there is a special condition to it, but because the level of support it requires. So some people with autism take ADHD medication, antidepressants, anxiety depression medications, or other psychiatric medication, as well as anti-seizure medication or medications for GI issues, when those typical or physical symptoms coexist with autism, as they often do. So while the autism has no cure, it is not only treatable but can fluctuate over time and can seem less extreme when it's not judged against neurotypical behavior. So this was the today's session where we tried to conclude how we can differentiate these kind of things, how we can, what you call, more or less explain that how these levels work and how these levels are perceived in different communities and different group of communities, and how people take it personally or not personally, maybe, but everybody is trying to understand, everybody is trying to coping up with this mechanism. There are still people who like to be called it as Asperger's because they were diagnosed as Asperger's syndrome, but the reality has changed. It is now called as autism spectrum disorder, and because it is a spectrum, there are different set of rules, not exactly rules, but you call it that people who need a different level of support is on a different spectrum, on this spectrum. And that is why we have developed this, by we I mean the medical world has developed this system where we call it 3 levels of autism. And though there is not a specific science behind it, but it's a field of psychiatry and psychology, and that is why every child, every human being who is autistic is different from the other one. So that is why it's also called a spectrum. The same reason it is called a spectrum, and the same reason it is categorized in 3 different levels, considering that every individual needs a different kind of support. So I hope this online session was helpful. If you have any questions, if you have any experiences, please do share it with us, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible and with as much research as we can. Thank you. Take care.